Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Modern Day Goddess podcast. I'm Ciara,
And I'm Solé.
and today we are going to be talking about the journey from the maiden into the crone. Right now, we are witnessing how women are really breaking out of this cycle of people pleasing and withholding themselves and really giving themselves the permission to step into the fierce wisdom of the crone.
You know, it's funny that you and I are talking about this partly because I think one of the things that brought you and me together and one of the things that we really align on is that we're both like super open-hearted, very smiley, like bubbly, bringing the vibe type of people. And recently, Ciara and I have both sort of individually and together been going through this transformation that she's just described. And that is from the maiden archetype who very much upholds everything I've just described, bubbly and sweet and fun and lighthearted and
Peacekeeper.
whimsical. Yeah. And then transforming that to what is actually the third archetype on this spectrum, which is the crone. And she is sort of the wise woman, if you will, like to put it, straightforward. And in the middle of that is the mother archetype. So it goes maiden, mother, and crone. And I think what a lot of women are finding right now, and Ciara and I also individually on our own journeys, are finding that the maiden is no longer helpful in so many ways and is no longer what the collective needs from the woman. And the truth of the matter is that the maiden archetype, while important and, necessary along this spectrum, it has also been overemphasized by a man's world. Women have been in many ways groomed to be quiet and submissive and docile and peaceful and sweetheart and, the light. And while that's like one dimension of femininity, it is only one dimension of femininity. And there are a multitude of dimensions of femininity and many of the others that exist both even in the mother archetype, but specifically in the crone archetype have been quieted and squandered and burned at the stake, if you will, because it doesn't align with the woman being docile and submissive and sweet and quiet and, subservient. And so I think what's happening right now as we kind of think of it as in the terms of the dark feminine, that women are waking up to being like, I am that way, and I'm also a multitude of other ways. And yet this is what's kind of praised, and yet also it's what gets my butt kicked in real life. I'm a doormat. I'm hyper available. I'm a people pleaser. Like there's so many tendencies of the maiden that actually do not work at all fundamentally to even be successful in this world. And yet women are trained so deeply to be that way that there's this kind of disconnect that's happening.
Yeah, what really is standing out to me right now is when you said subservient, because that is the way that we have been groomed since little girls, is whenever we would speak up against something that wasn't in alignment with us, or maybe it was even speaking about our emotions, how we were instantaneously shut down by either a caregiver or more specifically the feminine herself, our mothers, not to their fault at all, because they were also groomed in that way. And I actually seen a recent example of a little girl. She was 12 years old, and her brother started like publicly shaming her about a mistake that she made. And her mom started chiming in on that. And the little girl was advocating for herself. She was like, can we please not talk about this? Can we please not talk about this? Was having a reaction, and they bypassed her, the mom and the brother, into telling the story, like completely shutting down like her voice. And it was such an aha moment because it tied into everything that we have been talking about with the ways that we please others. That's exactly what happened to the little girls, us as little girls. All the little girls on the planet is just like, no, your feelings are too big. Your voice does not deserve to be heard. You don't have any wisdom. In fact, I am your parent. I have all of the wisdom. You need to be silenced. And it took place on all different levels growing up. Like I remember even as a teenager in middle school, we weren't allowed to dress a certain way because it would make the masculine, like it would distract the masculine. It would be a distraction. And so you would either have to go change your clothes or put on a bright yellow shirt that said dress code. And I remember from a very young age, it was just absolutely not in alignment with that. Very much triggered me and like, no, I'm going to wear what I want. Like, it's not my fault if they're distracted by me because my shoulders are out. But it just goes to show how deep this grooming and programming is, because Soleil and I, we really just love people. Like, we like to be a vibe. We like to bring like just great energy into the space. But we've had to realize that being the light and always being the vibe came with just that grooming of always pleasing others and putting ourselves to the side in order to be that light and ignoring our own needs. And the crone is just this fierce wisdom. She does not give a fuck if people are triggered or not. She speaks her truth unapologetically, regardless of that. And I feel like that is what is being called for us women right now, is to step into that space, that fierce sword of truth and that wisdom against the fallen world, so we can actually restore it back to a place of harmony.
Yeah. That part. And, you know, Ciara and I have talked about this being, rather than like a death, more of a transcendence, because the truth is there are components of the maiden that are still present in the crone. It is that they are mastered and more skillful, because it is true in both the maiden and the crone that she can see, we'll say, the higher timeline of things, and that exists both in seeing sort of the good in people and the high potential in people and in situations and circumstances. So the gift of intuition and foresight is very present as a feminine quality in both archetypes. And the maiden marries potential. The crone takes it for what it is and then meets reality where it is, because she knows that potential doesn't always realize itself. And I think that's a big transformation that's happening here right now, because a lot of women do end up quite literally marrying potential. They meet a man and they see his potential. They feel the joy. They see their light often reflected in this person, and they jump right in because it feels good and there's a lot of potential here. But as I've just said, the problem with potential is that it's not always realized. And a lot of people are not even actively realizing their own potential. And so to enter into a contract of sorts in this way with someone who you're really getting into contract with their potential is dangerous. And, you know, and I'm sure both genders do this, you know, because a lot of people do see the good in people, and that's not a bad thing. But it's to understand that, sometimes the good is your own light reflected, because if you're a high vibrational person, usually what you're seeing or bringing out in another is that reflection, which is not always who they actually are, which is to say that sometimes it takes a while to see who they actually are because they can't sustain the level that you set. And B, that potential is just that. It's just potential. And so you have to remember that. And I think the maiden has this tendency to live in the whimsical nature of things and in the potential of things. And she's actively probably reaching towards her potential and feels the joy and the elation of like that high vibrational timeline. And then she gets beat up, you know, to put it in however way, because potential is not what's here now. And she gets beat up by reality. And the crone is the one who has learned that lesson enough times to say, I'm no longer going to get beat up by reality just because I can see the potential in this. And I think that that's what's happening right now. And that's why, I mean, a lot of the women are using the term the dark feminine, and it's sort of relative to what we're describing here, which is really just, again, the woman who says no, who holds boundaries, who meets reality as it is, who sees her own light reflected and can recognize that it's her light that she's seeing reflected and not actually the sustainable light in the other. She's just wiser. She's like learned the lessons of the maiden. And this is sort of the spiritual transformation of women that a lot of women have undergone in the past, I would say maybe a couple of decades, because I do feel like there's this kind of cohort of us women who are like on the leading edge of everything we're talking about here, and we're transforming woman to goddess. You know, that's like the platform of this podcast is us saying like we're rewriting what it means to be a woman. And the new woman is not only actually the original woman who's been buried and burned at the stake with her spiritual gifts and her ability to see into the multidimensional reality, but it's also the reclamation of the multidimensionality of what it means to be a woman. And she is no longer just this one-dimensional, light, sweet, quiet, subservient, yada, yada, but now she's the whole entire thing. And she's willing to tell the truth even when it's uncomfortable. She's willing to say no when she needs to and honor that a no for herself is a no for everybody and that there's benefit to everyone when a woman says no. And she's willing to, not play small and put other people pedestal above her and act like she doesn't know who she is. Because at this point, many of us women who have like done this work know who we are. It's so much so that we don't even fit into like the very small box of the matrix anymore because we're too powerful for that, quite literally. And I think that that's what the crone is doing right now, is just breaking out of the box of what the feminine has been so far for, as we were just describing, like thousands of years. And now it's something else. And we're bringing that online.
Yeah, that was beautifully spoken. And the truth is, the maiden is naive. She isn't able to see the actual reality like you mentioned. It's like a complete bypass of what's really happening because she's in the higher chakras of the potential. And it's such a beautiful gift, and it's not something to just like shove to the side, but instead it's like being the bridge, because the crone, she lives in the womb, and then the maiden lives like in the heart actually, the heart and the crown. And it's like, how can we bridge that energy down? So yes, you do see the potential, you do see their good traits, but the womb wisdom is just like, but the reality is showing that you're acting out of your shadows. And the crone is just like boundaries. The feminine leads the masculine energetically. And so the crone needs to place the boundaries on what is absolutely not allowed. And she also has to shed light on the distortions of behaviors that are taking place. Because the maiden, she's just a big open book. She's so open. She just is such a beautiful like energy, honestly. It's just that little girl energy. We love her. We adore her. It's like a fairy just floating around with her wand, just spreading her magic everywhere. However, it is a detriment to yourself as a woman, because quite frankly, the people-pleasing energy creates the autoimmune diseases because you are constantly putting others above your own self. And then when you're resting into the crone energy, it's like, actually, this is not going to work for me. And she's unapologetic about it. She places a boundary, and it doesn't matter how it affects other people. She doesn't care what other people think, whereas the maiden is afraid to place the boundary because she doesn't want to hurt others. And I think that there can be a beautiful blend of both, where it's like you can get to a place of placing boundaries where it doesn't have to come off as aggressive, but your energy is like a hard no. And it's like, it doesn't require an explanation, but you can still honor the relationships around you, and just like, you don't need to just explain yourself. You can just say, this isn't going to work. I love you, but no. And then it just carry on from there. But what we're seeing, quite honestly, and it's so triggering to me to witness this in the collective right now, that there is just like this theme and this distortion around women and the feminine being masculine because they speak up and advocate for themselves and place boundaries. When in fact, that is the crone. That is the crone, and she is a powerhouse of wisdom. And I feel like a woman that is in menopause, which is the crone energy, because that is the embodiment of all the wisdom of your bleeding years, is frowned upon. And a woman, like, there's this horrible attack on women that are like middle-aged. Like, women just like, they lose value once they're in their 40s, because the truth is, whew, baby, they are their most powerful at that age in a continuum with each decade that unfolds. And they're attacking that because a woman becomes more powerful and has less tolerance for bullshit as she ages. So of course, let's disempower her as much as we can. Let's silence her. Let's make her feel small. And actually, let's profit off of her insecurities while we're at it, because we just have completely beaten her down to the ground. And she can't follow her intuition anymore, because let's be honest, a woman that is in touch with her intuition is a threat to the system.
Bam. I feel like we should end it right there now. Because, yeah, a threat, the ultimate threat, and not only to the system, but to the ego, because
That part.
the ego's biggest predator is one who sees. And a woman who sees is a threat to the ego, because the ego's only job is to preserve itself as the illusionary. And so a woman who just sits there and sees unapologetically without trying to pacify or kid glove or hold the hand, like so many of us women have like spent so much of our lives kid gloving the ego. I mean, down to like feeling bad, saying no to not having sex with a guy that you don't want to have sex with just because you, A, can actually get dangerous, and B, because the ego gets hurt and you don't know what's going to happen in that moment when the ego's hurt. And we're done. We're so done. We're so done placating and pretending like we are not absolutely multidimensional beings with multidimensional gifts just because the ego doesn't like it and the system doesn't like it, because the system knows that that's a woman in her power, and a woman in her power will burn the whole thing down. That literally is how this is going to go. And you were mentioning that the maiden lives in the upper chakras. I do want to say, and I love that you brought this in, we love the maiden. We're going hard for the maiden right now, but that's because we understand the need for this transformation. But obviously, like, the maiden is a wonderful archetype. There's nothing wrong with her. And she's sort of the adolescent spiritually in the transformation of woman into kind of the adult spiritually. And she does live from the upper chakras. In fact, the way I see it and have studied it in energy medicine, we develop from root to crown energetically. And a lot of times I think what happens is women and men end up staying in the upper chakras because it feels so good. It's that 5D, you're blazing the 5D truths and you're talking all the spiritual shit and like living up here in the you just what I call kind of Burning Man culture. No offense to Burning Man, but just, not totally grounded in reality. Right. That spirit in the spiritual bypass. That's exactly what it is. And true, like, awakening means you come back down, and you come back down to reality. You come back down to being in your body, and you're no longer bypassing and escaping, but rather just absolutely fiercely present. And I think that that's the energy of the crone, and that's the energy that the timeline of humanity is asking for from women again, because we've been so people-pleasy, open-hearted, self-sacrificing, living in the higher chakras, so sweet, so that I mean, just the list goes on. And again, absolutely, that is one dimension of femininity that is so beautiful, and we can play that role. But there's many other roles to play too, and to call that femininity is a disgrace to femininity, because femininity is so much more than that we've just packaged it up and put it in this nice little package with a little bow on it and lipstick, and then it's done.
And make sure you smile.
Literally. I mean, so, the transcendence is to develop yourself through upper chakras, but then to come back down and be in your body and to be in real time. Ciara and I say all the time, like boots on the ground in the spiritual war. It would be nice if we didn't have to, and we could just live in this utopic reality where there's no real spiritual war and we can all just, live in the 5D and da-da-da. But the truth of this reality is that we are in the middle of a spiritual war. Like, World War III is spiritual, and it is here now. And we are being waged war against through our skies, through the media, through you name it, public schooling, like the list goes on. And so it is up to us to become the resistance. And what we're describing here today is us becoming the resistance.
And we do that by being in our bodies, because your body will communicate with you what is actually not true. That is that gut feeling that we have all been trained to know about intuition. Like, you will feel like sometimes like a stab in your heart. You'll feel like a pain in your stomach. And you can only listen to those bodily responses if you are in touch with yourself, if you're grounded, like you said, boots on the ground. Because what happens is, which we see on the spiritual path of transcendence, it is these gurus like so high in the upper realms that they abandon the body and they become overweight, or they have to have caretakers while they're astral traveling and gaining all this spiritual wisdom. But they have neglected the body and they're not able to actually use that spiritual wisdom in the 3D on the earth as a human. Like, the most spiritual thing that you can actually do is to be a human and to insert yourself into the world with all this wisdom. And that's not to say you shouldn't go up into the 5D and meditate and get all these divine insights, but you need to do something with these insights. You need to take care of your body. You need to fill yourself with things that are going to be a nutritional like intake versus like a deficit. And I feel like, unfortunately, the maiden, like, there is a deficit in energy because she's just so open hearted and she wants to love everybody. I know, like, in my experience with other divine women, like, we'll be out on the side of the road and we'll just be praying for everybody, and just like imagine your energy to be like the money you have in your bank account. Like, you don't want to just be dispersing it everywhere. Like, there isn't an abundance of that unless you're very skilled and you live in the 5D. It's not reality. It's not the truth. Like, you have to be discerning and you have to be skillful with how you are distributing your energy and how you're showing up in the world. And you really need to listen to yourself. I feel like the crone, she knows how to trust herself, and it doesn't matter what the outside world tells her because she knows her truth. And that is the greatest spiritual mastery right there, is just so unapologetically knowing the truth for what it is and not needing to explain yourself. It's just like, okay, you can think whatever you want of me, and I know what lies within me.
You know, who's really present right now as you're saying all of that is Mary Magdalene. Because if you've ever read the Gospel of Mary, which was conveniently left out, you know, she was like, first of all, one of the apostles and arguably like Jesus's partner, arguably much of the reason why Jesus became who he was. And she was like left out and then labeled a prostitute. And then only much later, like in recent years, have they been like, actually, it seems that she wasn't actually a prostitute. Like, you know, and just so stereotypical of kind of what we're describing here. And if you read the Gospel of Mary, which is kind of like one of the lost texts, she talks so much about this, you know, and I think that that's pretty appropriately depicts what we're describing here of like the lost art of womanhood in so many ways, and that we have been cultivated to exist in a certain way, and that is literally what's lacking on the planet. Because, you know, not to knock men, but the truth is we live in a man's world, and most of the leaders of this planet are men, and we are like on the edge of absolute disaster. So something has to give. And while I'm not saying that that's the man's fault, I am saying that where are the women? And they've been left out of the spiritual text, and yet we are like arguably, you know, more tapped in and tuned in. You know, most people would say that about women in general. And we've been left out of the leadership roles, and we've been left out of like so many things that it's like painfully obvious what's missing here. And yet the threat that the woman in her power poses is so grand that that's why we've been left out. We've literally, those with like mystical powers were literally burned at the stake. In fact, I was learning more about the kind of witch hunts of the 1600s, and it was like a global movement. I didn't actually realize that. I guess I'm like American box of like thinking it was a Salem, you know.
I thought that too.
Yeah, it was actually global. Mm-hmm. They were doing this globally, seeking out people who they deemed as having sort of mystical powers. And I mean, not only burning them, but beheading them publicly, hanging them was another, like, it was like, and again, so typical of like how much of a threat a woman in her multidimensional gifts is, that they have to like then go through and say it's their fault that the world is falling apart, when women in their multidimensional gifts haven't even got an opportunity to be in them yet, because we've been stuffed in the small box of don't do that and don't know that and don't have that gift and don't have that foresight and don't. And now we're saying, now we're going to do. We actually are going to do that now. We don't care what you say. We don't care what plague you throw against us. Like, we've fought the plague that you provided to us, and we're still winning. And we're going to continue to win, because a woman in her full form is like a winning force of nature. And literally you work with the nature, you work with the elements, you work with the power of the earth when you're in this form. And again, it's, not necessarily man or woman, but I think what we're talking here is pretty specific to women, because women have been lost along the way. And there's a return right now that's happening that is depicted from the sweet, airy maiden to the fierce, knowing crone who unapologetically lives in her truth and lives in her multidimensional gifts and is no longer apologizing for it or explaining it or hoping everybody likes it. Like, fuck that. Fuck that, honestly.
Wow. And it's the modern day silencing and being burned at the stake is the censorship on social media. I was censored. Is it going to stop me? No. We're going to keep spearheading this. And the reason why the feminine has been attacked for hundreds of years is because she is a threat. Because a woman in her full power will take down the entire system. And it doesn't matter, like you said, what you will throw at us, because we will bend all of the elements. We will wield all of this unseen forces to back us up. And that is the truth. So all the ways that religion has tried to leave us out and to stop us, we're reclaiming that. And in fact, we want to unify with men, and we want to empower them, and we want them to lose the death grip that they have on their ego, because we need men and we need women. We need men to be empowered and living through their hearts, because the way that the world is designed right now is that it's not at all considering a woman's 28-day hormonal cycle and clock. We are expected to perform at the same rate as the masculine, and a man, hormones resets every 24 hours. So they get a new burst of energy every single morning that they rise. Whereas the feminine, it takes 28 days for us to regain that energy and that momentum. And we are expected to produce at that rate. And it's not like we want to be equal in terms of men, but we want to have that respect, because we will never be as physically strong as a man is. And a man will never be as energetically powerful as a woman. And that's the beautiful yin and yang complement that we offer as humans in union.
Yeah, it is. It is. And, we've discussed before about the true divine union happening internally. And I think that that's what we're inviting everyone into at this point, is to unify your inner reality, because we all have feminine qualities and feminine energy, and we all have masculine qualities and masculine energy, and both are necessary. And when you can unify that within yourself, then you carry both. And when enough people carry both, balance will happen on the planet, because as we have also discussed before, that everything starts internally. And right now it's out of whack. We are out of whack. People are out of whack internally. When we are no longer out of whack internally, that will express itself on the planet, and the war won't even exist anymore, because the war will have been won internally. Mm-hmm. And so, I think our invitation to anyone listening to this today is to lean into that, your inner unification, your merging of masculine and feminine within you, and the integration of those energies, so that you can exist in this way where it's balanced and harmonious, and that it's not one or the other, but that you can carry both in a healthy way, and that the truth of both and the power and the unification of both exists through the experience of who you are.
Yeah, and then that's the true divine marriage, is the marrying of the two. And then once you marry the energies within you, then it will take place physically in a marriage. So maybe you already have been married or been in a relationship where it wasn't harmonious or healthy. Once that is discovered within you, it will take place physically, because everything that we create and focus on within our inner world, everything starts energetically. It does reflect externally. And that is the gift that both men and women have access to, is in those realms of sitting with yourself and getting clear on what you want to create. And that's where our true power lies. And that's why it doesn't matter what is thrown at us in the physical world, because we know that true creation is within.
That's your homework, you guys. You got to spend some time just chew on what we've talked about today. If you're a male listener, thank you for making it all the way through. If you're a woman, maybe a lot of this resonates, because I do feel like the reason we talked about this today is because we've seen it so present in the female collective.
And step it up and let it liberate you, baby.
Truth, truly, truly, let it set you free. Let it set you free. All right. We love you guys. Thank you for watching. See you next week.